activism is not terrorism, but Kristi Noem is declaring it such, and saying that the recent martyr, Rene Good, is a domestic terrorist. And so there's so many instances that we need to go beyond just protesting. We need to build people power here in the belly of the beast that shows that we are able to stand and fight back.
Press the button to begin.
Hey, what is up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Social Primate. This is your host, Eddie Aguirre, and today we have the one and only. We have Paolo. He's a Peruvian activist, human rights consultant, writer, journalist. Paolo, you're a lot of things, and honestly, thank you so much for making the time to come out on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on to talk about this important issue on Venezuela, on Latin America, and how this relates to the migrants crisis here in the United States.
Yeah, which I think is honestly extremely important right now. You know, we saw these developments happen over the last couple of days, the escalation, right, the kidnapping of President Maduro. And regardless of what your conceptions are of this individual, like there's bigger things at play happening right now. And a lot of it is stuff that we've seen throughout history, right? So I definitely want to pick your brain on this and just kind of tell us first how you got into this work and, of course, what we're seeing right now on the ground. So when did your journey start into this type of work?
So, yeah, I've been politically aware since 2016, 2015, when Bernie Sanders started running. And then years later, in 2020, I started to become more politically active in the streets and seeing how people talk about the reality of their situation. And then I started to travel to my family's home country of Peru in 2022. On my second trip on December 2022, I witnessed a political coup d'etat that was supported by the U.S. ambassador, and she herself is a CIA agent and also worked in the Pentagon. So there were clear things about how the U.S. wanted to change the government to overthrow the democratically elected president that I voted for. And so he's a political prisoner. He was abducted, and he's in a maximum security prison that I went to visit and to speak with him one-on-one later in 2025. Yeah, in February 2025. So I met him in December 2024 through his lawyer, but also went back to the prison to demonstrate outside the prison with other Peruvians. And so we were activating, showing our support for his release. As you know, is really connected to how now President Nicolas Maduro was abducted. He was raided and abducted and taken to the United States on false charges. My president as well is facing this type of lawfare, what we call in Latin America lawfare, a form of a coup to keep out the political left-wing figures that are very popular throughout Latin America. How the right-wing and the U.S. government want to keep them out of government politics.
In this specific case, when you were talking about Peru, what led to that coup? Like, who was backing those individuals who led that?
The Peruvian oligarchy, first and foremost. They operate in Congress like a mafia. They have their Fujimorists. What they are the people who support the Alberto Fujimori dictatorship during the 1990s. Who he is infamous for a lot of things, but for one main thing is operating with death squads, anti-communist death squads, and killing civilians, and to go after the insurgent groups, which were there were two main ones, waging a people's war that they called it during that time. And so that type of violence, what we call the internal armed conflict, pushed the people to move abroad, especially in that time period, because people were caught in the middle of that conflict, just like in other places, like in Colombia, which was where it was centered. The drug trade was centered there, and we could talk more about that because how this relates to now. We're facing this new version of a war on drugs.
Mm-hmm. Now, just to kind of just to understand for myself. Now, we both know that during the Cold War, right, there was a lot of, the narrative was anti-communist, right? And we were seeing in Latin America, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of these countries were in some sort of way not pushing communism, but some of the ideas, right? You distribute wealth, kind of like the core ideas of what they go for, right? But because of the American capitalist system, they want to control resources. They want to be able to just have a reign on what's going on, right? Just most recently, we saw Stephen Miller announce that we have full right to the Western Hemisphere, right? So like this conversation has been ongoing for decades. But specifically during that time frame, we saw an increase in violence in Latin America. And it was just a consistent, back-to-back movement until eventually, I think, again, correct me here, it was maybe like early 90s where we kind of started seeing some of that subside, at least in the propaganda version of like what was going on. Now, when these movements start happening, right, when they start trying to do a coup, what kind of friction causes that to happen? Is it because of special interest by the U.S.? Is it just the turmoil between the country itself, between the people in there? Like, what can you tell us about that?
So first off, on the perspective of the U.S., since we are in the belly of the beast, it doesn't matter if it's Democrats or Republicans. When my president was overthrown, it was during the presidency of Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. And a similar coup that happened even before in April 2022 was Imran Khan, the leader of Pakistan, and he was very popular. He was overthrown in a similar fashion, and he's held in prison right now, and they're being run by a military junta. And so this is all, geopolitical reasons of overthrowing governments that are not aligned with the U.S. doctrines and for imperialist goals, because they want to keep isolating the other major powers, the superpowers such as the Russian Federation or the Islamic Republic or the People's Republic of China. And for the context in Latin America, since it's so far away, China is trading with a lot of nations throughout Latin America and building closer partnerships. And so the U.S. wants to re-enter there. Since Trump came back into power for his second term, we have been seeing last year that they've been continuing their U.S. and Peruvian military trainings with one another and with other countries like Chile, and so they're building that presence there too physically with U.S. troops and weapons of war coming into Peru for a fourth consecutive year. The Peruvian Congress, controlled by the oligarchy, have welcomed them to come in to... I initially thought it would be a proxy war in the future to do against Venezuela, but the U.S. did it themselves instead of by proxy, which by proxy they usually use Israel or Ukraine to go after who they deem as terrorists or imperialists or whatever. But we understand here in the belly of the beast who the true imperialists are. It's that who really want to colonize and subjugate the world and through world domination, basically. And so it's the United States is also commemorating 200 years of diplomatic relations with Peru, and they also had recently an FBI delegation. Mm-hmm. Now, why would the FBI come to Lima, Peru, when they usually are a political instrument of repression here in the United States through COINTELPRO, against the Africans, against the Black Panthers historically, and against comrades that I know of in the Uhuru movement, mm-hmm. where they had to go through a political trial, similar to how President Maduro and the First Lady Celia Flores are going through, which they are levied with conspiracy charges, which are hard to remove. And so the that trial for the Uhuru 3, that took place during Biden's time, who instigated this raid in multiple locations in the United States to go after them and to say that they were conspiring to be foreign agents with the Russian Federation, even though they have no connection with Russia. And it's just because they share the same opinion as Russia and anti-war position. And so this is truly going after dissidents that are against the colonial entity of the United States. And it's an anti-imperialist stance.
Yeah, I just to kind of jump off something that you were mentioning right now. Like, my question is, though, like, when you witnessed this stuff happening in Peru back in, you said 2022.
Yes.
What did that energy feel like on the ground in Peru, especially for that you were for the current government that got elected, right?
Yes. So he was overthrown. He had his own police forces aiming their guns at him and his family as they were trying to escape the presidential palace. He brought his family to the Mexican embassy, which the whole world understands that Mexico grants political asylum to a lot of people, especially in the left, but historically all sorts. Even the Shah of Iran, who was a brutal leader over there, and so he was granted asylum over there in Mexico once. But we understand, especially through recent history under governments like AMLO, the previous president, who's speaking up for Venezuela at this time too, I want to mention. He granted asylum to Evo Morales, I think it was, or maybe it was a different president before him. But essentially, it doesn't matter which type of government in Mexico, they had shared their solidarity with political prisoners, and so they granted asylum to people. I think it was definitely before AMLO's time, but yeah, it proves that point. And so the police were repressing the peaceful protesters at the time, and mostly of them are indigenous people protesting. And we've seen waves and waves of these type of protests coming to Lima because it's the capital, and coming from all the rural provinces who have been fighting for Pedro Castillo's release because he was the only hope of changing the constitution. Because what we have, the political constitution right now, still remains as the time period of the dictatorship of Peru, and the 1993 constitution. We have had 12 instances of constitutions in Peru, and so it just to mention that, because it reflects to the point of how the U.S. never changed its constitution, and it's very hard to even put an amendment agreed upon by the rest of the states or the federal government to update our laws and for the people, to say the least. And so for this context, it really relates to the U.S. how we need to update our constitution too, as it's a very old document that is from the early stage of this colonial period after their so-called revolution against the Brits, but to colonize the rest of the North America and occupy Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and Guam, and so forth. And so there, for Peru's context, the president, he was couped because, of course, the U.S. involvement, but back at home, the Peruvian right, they're ultra-right, they're very racist. And this relates to the diaspora here. We have many Peruvian diaspora people that are part of the right. Majority of them voted for Fujimori's daughter in the previous election, Keiko Fujimori.
And real quick, and I'm assuming that has a lot to do with the propaganda, like the propaganda people are consuming, is like, right?
In that country, it's been very held by the right wing. And so we only had one chance with this president having this leftist leader who was a teacher, who led a major strike in 2017, 2018. And so he was the president of a teachers' union. And so he was a very important figure. He's a rondero, a campesino, an indigenous a person. And so he was despised by the white Criollo elites in Peru. And this is the same thing in other places of the Americas, of the Abya Yala, that have that type of representation, like in Cuba, the Cuban diaspora are the sellouts. Just like the Venezuelans who despise Chavismo and Maduro, and Chavistas as well. Just recently, I saw in New York when they came out to celebrate there were protests for his release, and so they went there too. The Venezuelan diaspora, they came out there to say the N-word to African Americans. So they're really displaying their full racist connotations of how they treated people back home. How Afro-Venezuelans were treated were just terribly. And so what they mean by a democracy is to overthrow the current democracy that actually represents the indigenous, Afro-Venezuelans, all peoples, because they only want a democracy, quote unquote, for the elites, the whites, people. this is a term that they're using, or misusing rather, abusing democracy, human rights, and freedom. And of course, we understand how it's been completely misused, freedom all the time, in our understanding here in the United States. But so for back to Peru, Peru's President Pedro Castillo, he was about to nationalize the lithium industry. And, if you nationalize something, an important industry, you're going to be looked upon, targeted, the crosshairs upon you.
Sorry to interrupt you, but just for the listeners, like when you mention nationalize, can you give us a description of what that means for the broader audience?
Another word is expropriate, to change it from privatization, because what we have right now is a neoliberal colonial system where most of the resources are being sold unfairly and to the North Americans, to Europe, and so they're getting a better deal than what the Peruvians are. What the Peruvians, the indigenous people, are getting are actually nothing. Basically, they're getting their waterways poisoned with mercury. The water, the rivers are contaminated that they turned orange. People in the rural provinces, such as in Cusco, are unable to drink it, and if they do, they are their children they form birth defects, and so that's been a higher rating. Birth defects happening there in the rural provinces, and people still need to drink through plastic water bottles, and so in that context, as I've seen in the global South, people live essentially in poverty as street vendors. They do their business. It's a very big informal economy there, and that's how it's been a very, very long time. Before Fujimori implemented neoliberal capitalism, it was colonialism. It was a neo-feudalism, where the poor indigenous people who are darker skinned, they work in the farmlands as campesinos, as peasants. So for other resources, for Peru is very rich and has abundance of resources, and that's why the U.S. is getting critically involved in Peru in this coming years, since Biden and Trump. And so for Peru, they have silver, tin, copper, gold, of course, and a little bit of lithium deposits in Puno. But the majority of the lithium deposits are in Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. Those are what they call the lithium triangle. And those are, of course, other mining countries that are known for mining their resources. And so, we do all the mining, and China does the processing. The U.S. gets the product, of course, and they sell that back to the rest of the world in a very unfair price. The people have to leave there. They're forced to. They're displaced. They're forced to move. So many of the youth in Peru are moved to the capital, but then they find out that it's all overpopulated. That there's no other option but to leave the country, and so they move to Europe, to North America, because they see how it is in the mass media, how it's portrayed in Hollywood, how it's a fantasy. They always talk about going to Disneyland and such, and
for reals, that's like the selling point.
That's the dream of the Latin Americans. They come to the U.S. and see Disney World and Disneyland, but the reality is that we live in poverty here in the United States. I know so many people that are, on the brink of homelessness, or that they were living unhoused. We're all living as slaves to this capitalist system, dystopia, too. And so, when Peru is selling itself to the U.S., and the U.S. is, wants their investors to come in, just like they want to for Venezuela. They're saying that they want Wall Street to come in, and big tech and other sectors. When did Wall Street ever invest in the major cities here in the United States for the people? It never. It really just a concentration of wealth, and they want to re-implement that, replicate that in throughout Latin America.
Right.
And so they're not here for the people, and they're not for the Venezuelan people. And the ones who are cheering on that, such as the Venezuelan diaspora, are making a big mistake on that. They're not representing a form of freedom of any sake. It's a form of enslavement.
Now, question. So now, and again, I would like for you to jump in anytime you need to correct me, of course. But a pattern that I've seen, right, is that, again, the U.S. goes and invades, or they back somebody who's going to, in a sense, kind of open the land for corporations to come in, right, and to, again, build democracy, air quotes. But in reality, what we're seeing is that they go exploit, like you said, they cause damage to the environment around them. It affects the people directly. And then from my understanding, what that does too is that it concentrates the power in specific areas because they want to keep that wealth. They want to keep, opening up doors for this capitalist system to come in. But again, what it ends up doing is that it ends up putting pressure on the people on the ground that forces them to migrate, right?
Yeah.
So like you mentioned, they go out to the U.S. or wherever they're going. But in this case, specifically talking about the U.S., right, we just have that TPS that they were trying to remove a couple of weeks ago, and then it got reinstated by a federal judge.
For Hondurans, Nicaraguans.
And now the conversation I'm seeing is like, for example, one of the talking points was like, oh, well, now we captured or we kidnapped President Maduro. Now Venezuela is, air quotes, safe because we're going to be overseeing it. So now everybody else go back to your countries, right? So there's like this damage that the U.S. is causing directly, or even if it's indirectly, they have a goal in mind. But they're the last ones to consider and to be held accountable for the damage that they're causing, which is causing this migration to happen. And we're just in this loop, right?
Yeah. They're saying in Argentina, I've seen all over the world with the Venezuelan diaspora who are forced to migrate not because of the government, but because of the sanctions imposed on illegally by the U.S. I want to make that clear. They always blame the Bolivarian governments for defending their sovereignty. Mm-hmm. But so even them, they're getting the short end of the stick, just like the Cuban diaspora here in the U.S. that were forced to be deported, imprisoned by ICE and deported under the Trump administration. They felt betrayed. I know some Venezuelans who are anti-Chavista and voted for Trump, or that they are MAGA supporters still. And so it's very ironic. Even in New York, as we're seeing protests for President Nicolas Maduro and the first combatant, the primera combatiente, as we call her, Celia Flores. The Venezuelans are protesting with a Trump for King flag, as I mentioned, and saying the N-word against the people. And so they're really backwards. And so, to that point, they represent a modern-day version of what took place in the times of the colonial times, where there were loyalists to the to the conquistadors, because they, just like today, just like the Spanish Empire and the British and so forth, but now today with the U.S. Empire, capitalism all the wealth that was extracted and processed into these goods represent this form of, this is how we should re-implement into Latin America, and how this is going to bring us wealth to our people. That's how they perceive it. But these are loyals to the empire. Mm-hmm. In Latin America during the times of the colonial struggle, anti-colonial struggle led by Simón Bolívar and other figures for revolution and independence from the empires, we call them royalistas. And so here, of course, in the context in the U.S., it was loyalists versus the patriots. Mm-hmm. And so, they're loyal to this new empire because they view it as a savior, even though it is not. We've seen so many proven examples of how it's been a destructive force to the whole world. It never brought peace in the Middle East to this day. And so, we've seen this lies before with the WMDs, and that they're trying to do that again with lies of cocaine. Mm-hmm. There's no actual evidence on Maduro and Flores, who they're being charged on the same conspiracy charges of narco-terrorism and of possessing weapons as submachine guns, or machine guns in possession, even though, it's just so absurd. It's like an Al Capone charge on a mafia figure, on a cartel figure, when he's not a Pablo Escobar, but they want to try to portray him as such. When they want to portray him as a Manuel Noriega type of figure. Mm-hmm. And so they're they're looking into that angle. And I recommend that people watch Narcos or Pablo Escobar, El Patrón del Mal on Netflix because I was just watching that to get the hint of the mindset of what these colonizers wanted, how they perceive it, how they think that, and they're going after these revolutionary leaders who are anti-drug. The Venezuelan government have been undermining the drug trade when the drug trade tries to enter into the Caribbean. Just a couple of days ago, several days ago, before the attack on January 3rd, Venezuela was destroying at least 5 ships or shipments of these cocaine. So they're definitely destroying the cocaine trade and business there. It's not profitable to go through there, but it is profitable to go through the Pacific region, through my home country of Peru and Bolivia and Colombia. This is where the coca leaf is from. I've seen I've been to Bolivia to the coca plantations before they, of course, produce it into the drug trade. But that's a longer chemical process. But I've seen the coca farms themselves operated by the Afro-Bolivians, and they have no connection to the drug trade. And so this is the coca leaf is essentially a sacred plant to the indigenous peoples of the Abya Yala. It's not meant to be abused into this form of crack cocaine or cocaine itself. But who uses it? It's been the impoverished people of the United States or the rich people in Wall Street, depending your version of coke. But they're how they were brought there were, of course, through Pablo Escobar, the Medellin cartel, and other cartels that operated at that time in the 80s, 90s, but to this day still. But those are the problem is that the U.S. Weapons are given to these drug cartels in Mexico. They have arms brought to Mexico, and that's what the President Claudia Sheinbaum is going after against these U.S. manufacturers. And then I lost my other point, but
yeah. No, I actually wanted to jump on something that you mentioned earlier. Yes. Just like the illusion that if you're close to power, like the proximity to power, like if you're close to it, you're safe, right? And I think that's what even if we see it outside of this issue per se, the Venezuela, and just out of the international face, just in the U.S. again, like people think that if you are loyal, or if you're a bootlicker, right, you're a sellout, like that proximity to power is gonna keep you safe from everything that's going on. But in reality, we know that it's not true. History has taught us that it's not real. Like in reality, it's going to ultimately affect the other people outside of that. And then one thing also as well is that when you put it in that position, like the fact that these people are basically they have, there's a dicho in Spanish, something on like estás entre la espada y la pared, right? You're between the sword and the wall. Like you're put into a position where you see the economy around you in your government kind of collapsing, right? But in reality, like there's so many things at play, right? There's world banks at play, there's sanctions, all those things that put pressure on the government itself that equates to that government, high inflation, or, you have high poverty. But it's also being pushed by these big governments, right? The U.S. in this case. So it's just like a domino effect that they know this plan, they know this game, and they continue to play around with it. And the people are the ones who are not open to the fact that, well, I'm being lied to, right? There's like, it blows my mind, man.
It's a deliberate policy, or system rather. It's beyond just a foreign policy. It's been the same colonial system. Colonialism, first of all, it never ended. We're seeing that with this colonial theft of the oil, of Venezuelan oil. We're seeing the colonial war waged by the Trump administration against Venezuela. But and especially in the past 2 years, the genocide for settler colonialism in occupied Palestine. It's the same thing that what they're doing in Peru, in Africa. In terms of what I'm hearing is that indigenous Peruvians with nothing but just their tiny home, their land. Their land is being stolen by major corporations who get away with this because where's the legal jurisdiction. It's over there in Europe or it's over here in Peru. So, of course, if it's in Peru, they could buy off the court system. And so if it's over there, then it's harder for the indigenous peoples to make their case abroad. And so their land is being colonized and stolen. Their resources are extracted in these open pits, such as like in the Congo. And so they have a heavy loads of these resources being taken, and all the wealth is being brought to the global north. And so the colonialism, or neocolonialism, as people are saying, is still here, what we need to center around more so. And because we still are living under this variations of what Donald Trump calls the Donroe Doctrine. Activists said that first, but he likes the idea, so he officialized it. But Donroe Doctrine, the Manifest Destiny, this is the same forms of resistance that the Abya Yala, the Americas, have been waging against, which has been 533 years of resistance against these colonizers, against these conquistadors. The modern corporations are the same forms of these conquistadors too. And so Trump, he's basically the unofficial colonial dictator of the world too. He perceives himself as the world police, but he's really a criminal, leading a criminal state. We the whole world, even in Venezuela, understand about the pedophilia, about the Jeffrey Epstein connections. So he represents such an immoral aspect of the system that, it's right in your face. He's that type of arrogant and ignorant person. When Nicolas Maduro was still over there and president, throughout the year in 2025, he was trying to convince Trump about the statistics. He brought up statistics from the UN, the World Drug Report. Of course, he doesn't listen to the UN because he just recently pulled out of the several UN programs and such that the US is supposed to be involved in. And so he's not listening to reason at all. What he's listening to is his advisors, such as Marco Rubio, who actually has had what we call him as Narco Rubio. He literally has connections to the drug trade in Miami, Florida. In Florida, where, of course, all the drug trade goes to, and we understand that. And so his brother-in-law was involved in the drug trade there, and he was arrested. But Rubio was living in the same house as his brother-in-law. So, of course, he would know all about this drug infestation into Florida, the state of Florida. And so, they want to blame the migrants for drugs and crimes, but, it's really the people in power, the political elite. They still have a reason to keep the drug trade happening. The DEA even planted cocaine onto a shipment boat heading to Venezuela. And so the Venezuelans, of course, caught on that boat. And they destroyed 9 airplanes. And the airplane tactic was even something that Pablo Escobar came up with to fly them out there. And so these different forms of tactics that the U.S. want to plant this evidence is really wrong. And the system is very colonial. And so they're completely immoral to wage this lawfare, this colonial war against Maduro, Flores, against the Bolivarian Revolution. The people are standing with the Bolivarian government, not only in Caracas by the hundreds of thousands, but internationally. Now we're seeing people in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, and all over Latin America are talking about Venezuela, because especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, they see that it's they're going after Venezuela right now, a powerful government who are defending their sovereignty. The rest of Latin America are still fighting for their sovereignty, just like in Peru. We lost our sovereignty on the day when our president was kidnapped and is held as a political prisoner for over thousands of days. And so he's he's the latest example to what Maduro is. We have now two presidents in South America that are political prisoners, abducted and political prisoners, and so they all end up in the same goal of helping the U.S. empire to get closer to that region. I mean, they already have their U.S. bases still operating in Colombia. They have 5 or 7 military bases in Peru. And they have a need for Peru because of their natural resources and to kick out China.
Of course.
And so they say very much that it's their land, their region, their backyard.
Yeah, so I know earlier I brought up the Stephen Miller thing, so I want to just play this little clip real quick, just so people can understand the thought process of these individuals, right? So let me go ahead and put this up real quick here. Let's see.
For an hour, I think it's a really important conversation. I just wanted to reset, Jake, by making clear that it has been the formal position of the U.S. government since the beginning of this administration, frankly, going back into the previous Trump administration, that Greenland should be part of the United States.
So here he's talking about Greenland,
obviously. Very clear about that. That is the formal position of the U.S. government.
Right, but can you say that military action against Greenland is off the table?
It wouldn't be military action against Greenland. The Greenland has a population of 30,000 people, Jake. The real question is, by what right does Denmark assert control over Greenland? What is the basis of their territorial claim? What is their basis of having Greenland as a colony of Denmark? The United States is the power of NATO. For the United States to secure the Arctic region, to protect and defend NATO and NATO interests, obviously Greenland should be part of the United States. And so that's a conversation that we're going to have as a country. That's a process we're going to have.
Cool. So I'll stop it right there. And again, I just want to make a point here that it's the language, right? This language that you're out there to liberate, to save, to protect, to, the security of the world lays on this, right? Like that language itself, right? To somebody who's not completely aware of what's going on, obviously those words sound like a safe zone, right? Like, oh, we need this, right? So if it feels the fear that you already feel and tries to use it against you to let you know, like, oh, well, we got this. Don't worry about it. Well, don't worry about what we're doing. This is needed for us to protect ourselves. But again, it's that language, but what they're actually doing is the complete opposite. It's like it, in a way, in a weird way, it also shows how scared they are. They're so paranoid that they feel like they need to have control over everything because they're going to lose that power, right? So it's about consolidating all that. And I think that's the biggest part of all of this.
Absolutely. It is a form of what we've been saying, that we're under a period of a dying colonialism. And so they're grasping for, they're putting a chokehold onto Latin America as they're on their last breath. And so they're really going all out. Hopefully it's not going to be a nuclear war in this new year or in the coming years. But, we're seeing a final stage of this colonial empire collapsing. Israel will be on its own. And so in the context of Greenland, the Denmark, the Danish prime minister, she said that if the U.S. buys Greenland, then there will be no more NATO. And so NATO is important for the European context, but they are also involved in all over the world. They have non-NATO allied partners such as Israel and now Peru. Colombia used to be it. Colombia was referred to as the Israel of the Americas because of how ruthless they were with the anti-communist death squads and how they've been operating there. Colombia has been a war zone because of the narco-terrorism, the real narco-terrorism that Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel and other drug cartels that were operating there, how they ran for their businesses. So we see around the world people are just against this war drive, but especially here in the U.S., that they're building more towards this they're just consolidating more, upgrading more in their war machine. We are in a war economy, and so here in California, there's many businesses that profit off of it, and universities as well. That's why we've had during the encampments for Palestine divestments, calls for divestments, because it's all tied to the war machine, to Israel, and that here in the U.S. and in Europe, especially in Germany and in the UK, that there have been silencing and sentencing as well, activists and political dissidents, even journalists, for their crime of speaking the truth. Activism is not terrorism, but the Kristi Noem is declaring it such, and saying that the recent martyr Rene Good is a domestic terrorist,
Right.
and so there's so many instances that we need to go beyond just protesting, go beyond than having a general strike. Even we need to build people power here in the belly of the beast that shows that we are able to stand and fight back. We are not going to win it through just constant protesting. It's going to make us tiresome.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I've been to so many protests and seeing how the result is that now we are living under Trump, how Trump is returning to power again for a second time, and so we thought that we were done with Trump. The whole world thought that Trump is not going to come back. Of course, Europe was going to be glad about that, but when Biden came into power, and then he instigated this. He provoked Russia into this proxy war by arming Ukrainian neo-Nazis. And so that also driven migrants out of Ukraine too. And so we're facing this collapse internally too. When we have so many organizations fighting against the imperialists, we're seeing the challenge that the U.S. is having internally. We are seeing that that's why they're going after migrants through ICE, through the DHS in 2025 especially. And so, they went after the Venezuelans and put them into Nayib Bukele's torture dungeons in Sikot, which is just...
El Salvador.
Yeah, it's just similar treatments, how private prisons are run here in the United States. And I've been to 3 private prisons in Otay Mesa. That concentration camp is located near the San Diego border to Tijuana. The Northwest concentration camp in Tacoma, Washington, and the Adelanto concentration camp, which is just in the middle of nowhere, for people not to recognize that they're holding migrants there in San Bernardino County. So they're really, squeezing us into a position that a revolution will occur. And I'm going to talk about the aspects of what that it would look, but what we must understand is that building people power is going to be how we're going to defeat this place, this U.S. empire. And so that's what actually drove the FBI to go after people that I know, such as Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the leader of the African People's Socialist Party, who's been just changing on the ground the city of St. Louis in Missouri for the betterment of the African community. And so the FBI went after him and his the heads of the Uhuru movements because of that. And so because they are a vanguard party to not only for Africans but for all of the oppressed peoples and colonized peoples around the world, as they want to build this African internationalist movement here. So to go back to Latin America, there's a reason why Trump is doing this attack in this new year. Of course, it's a surprise, like what he did to Nigeria on Christmas Day, or this attack against the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin's residence. There's this reason why he's doing it right now, it's ahead of the midterms elections in the United States. And so the Republicans, to them, it's very important.
Yeah, especially with the way things are seen right now. They're
how we saw it last year.
Yeah.
But last year we've also seen as we're fighting back against Trump and his whole entire backwards agenda and this dystopia all around Latin America. I've seen as well as I traveled to Bolivia twice last year, second time to witness the presidential election, which turned to the center right. There's been a whole wave of the right wing returning to power because Trump is endorsing these Trump wannabes. For Argentina, they want to build the Javier Milei said that he wants to build a wall to enclose to not allow the Bolivians to come in. So he's building a wall he wants to build a wall in the border of the Bolivia and Argentina, which is the north of Argentina, because they're darker skin. And then the other thing is that Chile's new president, he's a son of a Nazi.
What?
Yes.
Damn.
And a literal Nazi who came from Germany during World War II because of Operation Paperclip that allowed Nazis to flee, including Italian. And so they were able to escape it because of the U.S. and CIA and to move to the Americas, North and South America, especially in Brazil, in Uruguay, Paraguay, Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. And so that allowed those governments to retain a right-wing government in the past through military dictatorships and to implement genocidal policies against the indigenous and forcing people to migrate throughout the 20th century. And so here Trump has been endorsing these type of figures. Jose Antonio Cast of Chile, he's a Pinochet supporter. And so he's going to be allowing Israel, he's a Zionist as well, he's going to allow Israel to come in too and to reverse what Chile has been doing under the previous government of standing on the side of Palestine. They're doing that with the rest of Latin America, including with Bolivia, which cut ties with Israel in the past, but they're rebuilding their relations with Israel and the U.S. And so and to extract the natural resources, of course, and as it's important to them, the lithium triangle. This is what Elon Musk wants. We will coup no matter who, was his statement in the past, and they're able to extract the resources in a few years. And so, once they privatize every sector, and so those are some of the candidates that Trump was endorsing. In Honduras, at the same time with the presidential election, there was electoral fraud, and the candidate he was endorsing is a ultra-right person who's pro-imperialist, pro-U.S., but as well as he was pardoning a actual narco president. Now that seems confusing to everybody, but it's only because we don't understand that it actually fits the agenda for the U.S.
Yeah, it's just the interest, And I mean, one thing I wanted to do, just because we are about almost at time, just to kind of backtrack just a little bit. I grew up in the time of the Iraq war, Afghanistan, 2001. So the whole concept of the war on terror was huge, right? Because that's how they weaponized the attacks against the Middle East, and on top of and at home, the same thing, just kind of going after the people who fit the criteria, right? So me growing up on that, I have to be honest here as well, to the audience. It's like early on, anytime I heard the word terrorist or anybody who was labeled or looked like somebody who was labeled like that, to me, in my head, it made sense. Like, oh, I'm scared, right? And it goes back to that fear. They hijack that fear. They make you pit against yourself against everybody else. And it baffles me because now, fast forward now, I'm, 2026 for a new year. A lot of us within that same age range grew up on that, and for us to not be fully aware, or sometimes I even see memes. People are making memes of like America being like the best, or they got Maduro, and like they make a joke out of it to insinuate like, oh, the U.S. is the power, right? But in reality, like, they're victims of that propaganda machine, you know? And, you know, just to kind of, since we're ending this conversation shortly, what can you tell people? Like, how do we combat that amongst each other? Because, I mean, that's where it starts. Again, building a coalition of people, our community, to bring them together. But if we're not allowed or able to have these conversations with them, or at least understand how we can get past the propaganda that they know, like, what can you tell us? Like, what kind of advice have you seen on the ground with people?
Yeah, it's going beyond listening to the mainstream media. It's listening to independent journalists with concrete analysis of experiences that they've traveled, or having guests that they've traveled to these regions of the global south. But is to join an organization. That's very helpful to, you know, your own sake of helping your own community. You know, instead of just listening to a podcast like here. But we really need to be more involved in groups, in coalitions, in alliances, to face off of this U.S. empire. You know, when we don't advocate any lone wolves to, you know, go after ICE or anything like that, or even going after the president, even though we vehemently despise that extremist that Trump is. And so we need to keep organizing as well, and forming this unity. Our understanding that international solidarity is a key to our collective liberation. And for the diaspora, you know, whether you're right-wing or left-wing or nothing, apolitical. Of course, Latin America is not a monolith. You know, we have these Venda Patrias, we have people who are anti-imperialists. And so we have, you know, those two major camps that are facing off their trauma from the 20th century, from the 21st as well, from their experience in the global south. That trauma is still, you know, fighting against the communists, fighting against the socialists, and us is fighting against the dictatorships that the U.S. is imposing on Latin America. You know, the real dictatorship was in Peru, or still is in Peru right now, and so we have to keep politically educating people about that, and the political education is organized in these larger organizations. You know, I'm involved with a collective that I co-founded to organize Peruvians in the diaspora in the U.S. and to inform them. And so it's called Los Ronderos de las Redes. And Ronderos is referring to how people back in Peru, the context of the internal armed conflict, were defending themselves from the insurgents and also the military that were there, part of the dictatorship, anti-communist death squads. And they were defending the communities from the terrorists, essentially. And so it also symbolizes to the point of our kidnapped president as being a rondero as well. So another organization that I'm very involved in is the Hands Off Uhuru Fight Back Coalition. It's part of the Uhuru movements, and Uhuru means freedom, and libertad in Spanish, Malaya in Tagalog. This is a crucial organization that is showing the pathway for how we could actually fight back against this colonial entity that we live in, how white people can actually support the liberation of the Africans, of Latinos, of all colonized peoples, instead of just doing a regular protest on their own. So we unite with the African people in the struggle for self-determination to give them reparations and rebuild, for example, the city in St. Louis, as they're rebuilding the city for their African people. And so this is happening in the belly of the beast. You know, this is transformative to those communities like that, just like it was for Venezuela with the communes, with the establishment of more hospitals, more education. So it's really how we're building socialism inside the United States, a socialist project that we should check out in St. Louis, Missouri, through the African People's Socialist Party, led by Chairman Omali Shatella. The other organization I'm involved in regarding migrants, it's the International Migrants Alliance. We had a conference in Portland, Oregon, uniting with many other groups, organizations that are working to fight against this imperialist power, as we recognize that the reason why there's a causation and effect of the forced migration, and it's because of this major military might of the U.S. empire that is bringing these regions into war-torn countries, into forcing them into destabilization and forcing people to migrate. And so we want to say stop that to the point that we can go back to our home countries. What they're doing to Venezuela, what they will soon do, actually, to the latest updates about that situation, is that the U.S. is sending thousands of troops to Puerto Rico, the tiny island that's colonized by the U.S. They are sending thousands for a week-long military exercise. So they're gearing up for another round of strikes or an invasion, on-the-ground boots invasion in Venezuela, or possibly in another region of Latin America. But it could come in February, as soon as February.
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
I know there were, I think, a few days after they were talking about, or the day or so after the Venezuela incident happened, they mentioned or they gave a list of other countries that they're considering of doing similar actions, and one of them was Cuba, I think Mexico, I think Colombia as well. Like there was a few other countries that they're kind of insinuating that they may do something similar.
Yes.
Like what can you, before we end this, what can you tell us about that? Like what do you foresee that looking like if it happens?
Yeah. So going to the point of how they're maximizing their effort right now in this current time period, in the second year of Trump's administration, they really want to go after the rest of the Latin American leftists. It doesn't matter if you're anti-imperialist or if you're a center left. They place the sanctions onto the Brazilian government. So and higher tariffs as well. They're going after they've done previous U.S. coup attempts in Honduras and in Colombia, and so we're seeing that the rest of Latin America needs to be ready to defend themselves and to arm themselves and to unite against this tyrannical force that Simón Bolívar recognized that the U.S. is seems to be a form of oppression, but it calls themselves freedom fighters to the rest of the world through their manifest destiny, through their Monroe Doctrine, through their imperialist agenda, their political hegemony. So we need to, here in the Belly of the Beast, align ourselves with the anti-imperialist movement, with the anti-war movement, but join in organizations that are doing the concrete work and counter those type of people that are saying the opposite. The Venezuelan diaspora, or these people are just exactly like the Israelis, the settlers, and so forth. They share the same opinion of Zionism. They don't care about the deaths that took place in Palestine. They didn't care about the bombing or the deaths that took place in Caracas. In fact, they celebrated about that because at least they got rid of the dictator, they call him, even though he was a democratic president, and he's a people's president essentially. Just like we have a people's president that are just like for Imran Khan of Pakistan, and in Peru, Pedro Castillo, a people's president like Evo Morales in Bolivia, a people's president like Rafael Correa of Ecuador in the past. And so we are the rest of Latin America, besides Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, we all have to fight for our sovereignty, because we have to understand that this is an anti-colonial struggle. This is either our liberation or our colonial subjugation.
Dude, Paolo, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. Extremely insightful. Thank you for really going down the rabbit hole with me. I wanted to end it off with just playing this clip that Galo News released, and it was a conversation, just a quick summary on that. It says, this evening, immigrant rights organizations and community members gathered at Mariachi Plaza in response to the killing of Renan Nicole Good by an ICE agent identified as Jonathan Ross. And Ron Goches from Unión del Barrio asked community members that if they're serious about change, they should be part of a serious organization. And I'm just going to play a quick clip from him. And let's see.
And today, the message that I bring to you is If you're here today, obviously you're here because you care and you're pissed off about what happened. But if you're here today and you're not a member of an organization, join one. If you're serious about changing this, there's TV here, so I won't say the words I was going to say. If you're serious about changing this system, you have to be part of a serious organization. An organization whose central mission is the destruction of a messed up system that should not exist, and that we replace it with a system that we know will benefit the masses of the workers, and to us, that's socialism. Yeah. So, let's not be confused, brothers and sisters and siblings. This is all pointing in one direction. I think you know what I'm talking about. This is pointing in one direction. None of us are safe. Documented, undocumented, people of color, or a white woman from Minneapolis. All of us as workers are under attack, and if we don't unite, they will gun us down one by one. But going back to history class, there's only one way to defeat fascism. And that's the way that it's going. But you can't do that by yourself. So if you're not part of a serious organization, join one. What if you don't like any of the organizations, and start your own and make a better one.
Powerful words by Ron.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, just to kind of jump on that for our last question here. In your eyes, we have an idea of what Ron is talking about here. What does that look like in action for you?
It very much is changing people's minds, first of all. Commemorating our losses, such as Rene Good, but also internationally. Today I want to mention that in Peru's context, it is 3 years since the deadliest massacre in recent history in Juliaca, Peru, that 18 people were massacred by the U.S.-trained Israeli armed Peruvian military and the police force. This is an example of how it is all connected to the global struggle against U.S. imperialism and their proxies. We need to fight for Peruvians. We need to fight for the Venezuelans. We need to fight for Puerto Ricans, Haitians, and so many more colonized peoples, and especially the Palestinians, the Congolese, and the Sudanese, and all Africans. And so as we're seeing how it is all interconnected and how they're being attacked at the same time as all the eyes are on Venezuela. Like in Burkina Faso, they were attacked, and the Palestinians, they were attacked. We need to fight for their, in defense of their sovereignty and fight for their liberation. So the other aspect is that, we need to join organizations, as I said, and our comrade Ron Gorges has said, and want to mention again, Los Fronteras de las Redes, the African People's Socialist Party, also known as the Uhuru Movement. You can check them out at the Burning Spear on their website, on YouTube. Yeah, that's their news outlet. And the International Migrants Alliance, which has done incredible work as they're fighting for migrants' rights, as we unite with Venezuelans who may disagree with Maduro and Chavismo, but are fighting for the same liberation struggle for their sovereignty back at home. They don't want to see the war, a colonial war, coming to their home country. They want to go back, and so we have to expose the hypocrisies. Why is Trump administration going to be destroying our homeland and forcing more of our people to move abroad, especially to North America? And then we're treated the same way in the ICE prisons and even murdered, as we've been seeing. Yeah. Even there was an African man who, I don't know if it was he may have been a U.S. citizen, but he's a father and he was a family man. So he was gunned down by a off-duty ICE agent. Yeah. It doesn't matter if they're on duty or off duty, but they're being killed, and we need to defend our people. That took place on the New Year's Eve. Yeah,
and just to give a name to the individual that lost his life, Keith Porter. He was shot and killed by an off-duty ICE agent as part of a New Year's Eve celebration. Paolo, thank you so much again for making the time to have this conversation with me. I hope this is a conversation that gets people talking. And if not, at least, go find something else that will get you to the point of where we can have these conversations. But if people want to find out more information about you, follow your work, where can people find you?
Yeah, on social media, I go by the Peruvian Chasqui on Telegram and on Instagram. Our organization that is Los Renderos de las Redes on X and Instagram. And we produce a lot of work over there. We're on the ground. We have people in Peru, even U.S. expats that we organize with. And so it's a back-to-back relations we have here in the U.S. As we're mobilizing our diaspora here, but also making connections here because many Peruvians need to recognize that our liberation is at the same level as Palestine, as in for Venezuela, because we cannot put our struggles for our homelands back. We need to put them front and center to have more people understand why we wave the Peruvian flag, why we wave the Huipala, the indigenous people's flag, which is a symbol already now as of all Latin America, even though it came from the Andes. And so we understand that that it's very important that we need to fight for Latin America at this very moment.
Thank you one more time, Paolo. Everybody else, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace out.
A rock, duality, my DNA, energy's all I got. Rhythmic alchemy, my paintings into pleasure. No, I'm not immortal, but my songs will live forever. These itty bitty pieces of my soul typed out in letters. And shrug it to some words, yeah, paragraphs make me feel better. Since I was a youngin', yeah, I always loved to read. As steady as my grandma, me lo leas, mama, please. A daughter of the infinite, gifted as an infant, yeah. I reminisce on instances where God showed me these images of prisms, of Rubik's Cube of vision. One day I heard him whisper, go hard or go home. Was in that moment where I felt like I belonged. Same song, serendipity's my serenade. I know I'm out of key, but I got keys to the Escalade. Big body, baby, pushing lyrics like a heavy weight. Reflective surfaces, only curses for narcissists. One pointed finger, three indicate where the problem is. The truth is hard to swallow, feeling stuck in my esophagus. The science of the spiritual, proposing my hypothesis. No self-proclaimed prophecies. God is anonymous, bet he's bumping oldies slow. Riding with hydraulics, God's a woman, getting her education. Never for the money, but the culture's elevating here. Yeah, the culture's elevating here. Yeah, the culture's elevating here. Yeah, the culture's elevating here.